Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar. I'm Janet Walden. I'm the CEO of the Center for Collaborative Solutions, and we're a nonprofit that was founded in 1991 with a mission and a passion for unleashing the power of people working together. This is our third in a series of webinars CCS is offering this year, covering a range of topics that are in our areas of focus. And please go to our website, our CCS website, to access these webinars. And Kim's going to put the link into the chat. So today we're going to bring you a conversation among several leaders in the field, exploring the issue of how to successfully address student trauma. And for over 15 years, CCS has been working actively to bring about student well-being through our Healthy Behaviors Initiative, and this webinar is an outgrowth of that work. So just a little bit of logistics before we get started. This afternoon, our panel is going to speak for approximately an hour, and then they'll answer your questions for the rest of our time together. So please enter your questions. See the Q&A button there at the bottom of your screen as you think of them throughout the panel discussion. And we'll get to as many of them as we can. So now it is my pleasure to introduce to you the two people who will be moderating our discussion today. I'm happy to say that they are both members of our CCS Board of Directors. Teri Burns brings such dedication and a wealth of experience in public education at both the state and local levels. Her commitment to education has included decades of service as a school board member. She's also served as a legislative advocate for the California School Boards Association, and she's most recently retired from her latest position as Director of Legislation and Policy for the California State Board of Education. And Bruno Marchesi has spent his career serving children, youth, and families in countless ways. He's currently the California State Director for the U.S. Soccer Foundation. Previously, he served as our CCS Chief Operating Officer in charge of both our Healthy Behaviors and our My Brother's Keeper initiatives. Before that, years of experience in the expanded learning field in roles that gave him unparalleled insight as well as the opportunity to make so many important contributions to the field. Thank you both for leading our panel discussion today. Take it away, Bruno and Teri.
Thanks. So welcome everyone. Thanks for checking in. Again, please, we'll be answering questions towards the end of this discussion, but be sure and put your questions in the question and answer section so that we're ready to go with those. Bruno, would you want to introduce our panelists?
Yes, definitely. So we'll start with Mary Rimbey. She has been teaching for the past 7 years at Jefferson Elementary in Natomas School District. And so welcome, Mary. And we also have Dr. Marie Pinto. She is the CEO of the Pro Youth Heart program in the Central Valley, specifically in Visalia, and she works with 7 school districts. And Gary Hardie, he is the president of the Lynwood Unified School District of the school board. And so welcome, Gary. We appreciate having you all here today. So Teri, how about you get us started with the first question?
Sure. Well, we know this has been a challenge for everybody. As you mentioned, I've been doing school boards and school business for 35 plus years. And this big switch to everybody all at once moving to online education is no small challenge and something we haven't tried before. So, Mary, you've just started back to school. You're back in online classes for the year. How's it going? How are the kids feeling these days? What's happening with their mindsets and thinking?
So we are 18 days into school officially, so only just a few weeks, and I am feeling, I know that the kids have been having a hard time with connectivity. So, and that is multiple things. So we have internet connectivity, computers, connectedness to their peers, to their school, to their food sources. So things are definitely a struggle for a lot of the students in my class, and I know a lot of our students at school, but connectivity is really a big part of that. So having internet, even if they have hotspots or home internet, getting kicked off of Zoom calls, computers not working, not being able to participate because of sound or video issues, being able to talk to their friends. I often, I always leave the Zoom on during our breaks and our lunches, and just listening to them trying to communicate with their friends, and just knowing that they don't have that face-to-face connections with their friends or playing with them. And then being connected to school. We're not on campus. We don't feel, I know that a lot of times it's difficult for the kids to feel like they're part of that school family. And then food sources have been difficult for some of my students. And I have asked them through surveys that are all confidential about their food supply. And I know that some of them are struggling with that. And so I've tried to get them in communication with some of our food programs that we have through our school. So that's one of the big issues that I'm seeing.
One of the things I've seen is that folks are doing like school dress day and stuff. So even if you're on the computer, on the Zoom, everybody's wearing the Jefferson t-shirt or whatever it is, just to rebuild that sense of the school community.
Yes, exactly. We do that 3 days a week. We have different days where they dress in different ways. So we have our college days on Wednesday. We have our kindness days, our anti-bully days on Thursdays, and then our school spirit days on Fridays.
Great. Thank you, Mary. So I want to get us started just by framing the conversation for today. Specifically, that I want to give a shout out to our audience members. We have live audience members here, about 130 of you who have decided to join this afternoon. You'll get an opportunity to ask questions directly. And so thank you. And then this conversation will be available as a recording at the Center for Collaborative Solutions website after this event is done. So where I want to frame this conversation, and the reason why we invited these amazing panelists, is that they all bring a very unique perspective. We want to frame this conversation around policies, systems, and environmental changes, and what has been done, what are we doing to address student trauma in the COVID-19 era, specifically in the classroom setting with after-school programs and partnerships. We want to talk about it from a school district perspective, from a school board member perspective. And the thing that I want to highlight here that's very, very important is that the folks that are listening to this conversation right now live, we have educators, we have classroom teachers that have joined us, we have school principals that have joined us, after school program staff that have joined us, and we also have parents that have joined us to listen in to this important conversation. So I really want you to take that into consideration with your answers, because we are listening and we want to hear from you. So Marie, let's talk about connectivity. So Mary talked about connectivity, like say, for example, around food security. And what we thought was a basic need, you know, the definition of basic needs as it relates to education and the well-being of young people and their families has changed because of COVID. How have you, as your program, have addressed food security or insecurity in your community in the Central Valley?
Well, being in the Central Valley, and thank you, Mary, for talking about all the connections. I mean, our students, I mean, we're in a rural community. We're a community of all essential workers, and so we actually have an in-person program going on. Currently, we're at 11 sites. We're working all day. They drop off the kids as early as 7:45. We have them all day until 6 o'clock, and trying to make those connections with assistance with distance learning, connectivity where they may not have any broadband or technology to be able to do that, and then transitioning into our expanded learning program. So we work very closely with our school districts to make sure that that food security link is closed. I mean, all of my school districts are serving, you know, breakfast and lunch, And so we make sure that those kids are that our district either sets those meals aside and we go and pick up those meals and actually physically bring them to the classrooms for the kids to eat. And then we also provide a snack in the afternoon when we're doing our expanded learning program. I mean, traditionally, we're a large program. I mean, we're upwards of 18,000 kids during a school year. So right now, I mean, it's small, but it still allows us to be able to do our healthy behaviors. We still do our snacks. We still do our table talk. We just now do it in the classroom, and they do it 6 feet apart. And but we've worked really hard at still bringing that consistency of breakfast, lunch, and a snack in the afternoon. They still go outside and do some kind of activity. We have picture day. We did picture day at every single one of our sites because those kids were going to miss having pictures at school. We do dress up days. And so, as Bruno said, addressing those basic needs of food, a safe environment, a caring adult, and that consistency, and making it look as much like school as we possibly can. None of our programs, our current full day programs, are on school sites. I take that back. Some are not. And so for those kids that are not on their school site and can't be with their teacher and be with their friends and be in that environment, we're trying to make sure that there's consistency as best as we can. So we work very closely with all of our school districts and our food service providers to make sure that breakfast and lunch is there, provided by the district, and then we supplement with an afternoon snack and water and all of those other kinds of things.
Thank you, Marie. And I want to take us back. I want to take us back to, say, February of 2020, before schools shut down. And on an average day, Marie, you were operating in 50 plus after school program sites, 7 school districts, 5,000 students a day, perhaps, or more. And a lot of those students were receiving a free or reduced priced breakfast, lunch, and supper. So perhaps 3 meals a day. And then March came and there went that, right? So Gary, question for you. Take us into the mind of a school board and decision makers at a school district. This is the first time ever that I saw people get together on a Saturday and say, look, we just shut down our schools on Friday, but on Monday, these babies need food security. Take us to the process that Lynwood took to get a food program going over a weekend, or to give materials to young people in real time. How did that go?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm glad that you took us back to February 2020, because for Lynwood, that's when our preparation and planning began. We sort of saw the signs on the wall, the writing on the wall, so to speak, that we may have a situation that is beyond our control and would inhibit our ability to hold school in person. So we formed a task force of our employee associations and parents as well to try to reimagine what distance learning would entail. The hard part was that initially we thought we'd be only out of school for 2 weeks, and then it went to a month, then it went to the rest of the year, and then here we are again, distance learning. So what it looked like was knowing in Lynwood that our schools were not just about academia, but a central hub for resources for families. So we knew that we had to have these services continue virtually as much as possible. But one of the basic needs that we needed to meet was that food service. Food insecurity is a barrier that inhibits learning for kids each and every day. So school districts across the state are trying to expand service options. But when you have a situation where it is safer for folks to be at home, that presented a lot of challenges for us to safely get food to people who we knew may not eat without our services being provided. So we started to work out food distribution schedules. Ours was ready to go by that Friday, even though it was announced by Monday. But we sort of had it figured out, this grab and go. Still found some hiccups with, initially we were required to have students be in the car, be present. And again, that was counterintuitive to a stay-at-home order where kids were to be safe. So we had to push the federal government to allow us to distribute food without having students have to be in the car physically. So there was a lot of challenges and nuances that we had to look at systemically to ensure that those vital programs that our parents and communities relied on stayed in place. But more so, not just having food distribution, we knew that this would impact the entire family, and school lunches weren't going to be enough. So we then partnered with LA Regional Food Bank and other providers to create a food pantry. That was Drive Up that happens every Wednesday, that's still going on today. Because again, we know that some parents may have lost their jobs. Some parents may have already been experiencing food insecurity, but this pandemic made a lot of those problems more pronounced in our communities. So we had to look at it from the 30,000-foot view for part of it, and then get into some of the nuances in areas that we ensure the services still remain in place. And one such area was mental health and special needs support. We introduced a hotline for support for our families, and at the last tally from March until June, we had over 1,000 families call that hotline for support. So we knew that people were having a hard time with the pandemic, but we wanted to remain a beacon of hope and of light in our community by making sure that we still provide the vital resources that our families knew that they could come to us for when schools are open during a regular day.
Mary, what kind of changes have you seen in the mental health and psychological support services and policies now that we're in this online situation?
You know, I think it's threefold. At the county level, they'll tell you that we've been experiencing record highs in reporting of child abuse and domestic violence. That's trauma-inducing. You talk about a community like Lynwood that is filled with essential workers who have to go in and out of the home and adjust their patterns to make sure that they if they may have come in contact with this virus, that they are taking steps to be safe and clean and being apart from their family. That's also created some trauma as well. And the other part is just the overall stress that we all are feeling in the wake of this stay-at-home order. I can speak for myself. The fact that my sleep schedule is pretty much non-existent. I have to try my best to turn my brain off. There's more screen time than I want. And, you know, we have to realize that as adults, our kids are feeling the same exact things, the same anxieties and the same fears. So what we try to do with these services is just to provide an outlet for families. But one of the most important things that we did is to let parents know that not knowing what to do in this environment is okay. It is natural. And then here are some tips that can sort of guide you and support you through the process. So that support looked most times like a listening ear, but also an encouraging word with some best practices.
Great.
Mary, are you looking at students differently? Are you seeing the same things that trigger you to watch kids in a classroom, or are you seeing different tells on their about their concerns?
From a classroom teacher setting?
Yeah.
So I am seeing, similar to what Gary was saying about like the trauma. The problem is that kids who are already identified of students who have trauma, we already know they're on a watch list. We already know what to look for. It's the kids that were not identified beforehand and have new traumas that is very hard to see on a screen. I see this much of them every day, and sometimes I see what's happening in the background, but I don't always get to see, you know, the full picture of the full child. And it's not like the face-to-face where they can pull me aside and say, hey, Mrs. Rimbey, something's happening. I need your help. So it's very hard over the screen to be able to identify those new traumas and the new things that are happening, unless it is blatantly on the screen. And that's really been the struggle for me. And I know that, you know, our district and our school have tried to put in place some extra supports. We have a tutoring and wellness center that just came out, launched actually yesterday for our district for homework support, as well as social emotional workshops and parent workshops, mental health support for parents. We have a new social worker on our campus now as well as our school psychologist, but it's really hard to identify the new traumas that are happening because of this, because we're not face-to-face, because we're not having private conversations with kids. The kids that would normally say, hey, Mrs. Rimbey, can I talk to you at recess time? It's not happening. So it's really hard to identify those new traumas.
And Mary, I want to follow up really quickly, because I tend to look at things at the national perspective. I have done work at the statewide perspective, but where I think the work really, really matters is where rubber meets the road, what's happening in these classrooms. So I talk to a lot of teachers. My wife is a fifth grade teacher for the last 20 years. And so I get to hear the Zoom class every single day of my life. And so where it matters most to me is, you know, a lot of teachers tell me we definitely are going to remember spring 2020 for the rest of our teaching lives. Yes. And some teachers tell me we want to forget what happened in spring 2020 for the rest of our lives. What would be your takeaway, your reflection from what happened spring 2020 as it relates to impacting young people and students from the educational side of the house?
Well, spring was not easy for any of us. It wasn't easy for teachers or kids or parents, anyone. I was experiencing my own struggles, having an 8-month-old baby at the time, trying to assign things and connect with kids and tell them we were in a similar situation. They said, okay, we're going home on a Thursday. We'll be back on a Tuesday. And that turned into 2 weeks, which turned into a month, which turned into, like Gary said, we're still in it. So, you know, spring was definitely not something that was ideal for anyone, but I think it was a great learning experience. And with practice, I think that we've all become much better at what we're doing. So, like you said, a lot of people would like to forget that, but I also think that it was a great takeaway and a great learning experience for me to do better now than I did then, personally. And I know a lot of teachers feel the same way. And I know parents, I've had several parents talk to me and say, wow, this is so much better than it was in the spring. And I'm like, yep, I agree with you. It is so much better than in the spring. It's not ideal. It's not the best case scenario, but it's the best case of, you know, we're making the best out of the situation.
Great. Marie, I want to turn the conversation to you around connections with the families. And I also want Gary to chime in this, because I know that his school district is doing a lot of work around connecting with families. But what I learned in the spring is that as we were trying to connect with families, a lot of the after-school programs probably had more robust connections. They even had the latest phone number of that family. They could quickly text that mother, where a lot of school offices perhaps didn't have the latest number or that connection. So tell me a little bit about that in terms of how you were able to help and partner with the school district to meet the needs that were before us and connect with those families which you have great relationships with.
Yeah, I mean, spring 2020 was, you know, as Mary said, it wasn't easy, but it was a real reflection time for us to be able to say, okay, what's going well and how do we do this better? Because we were there on Friday and never went back. And so, and it has still not gone back. And so it's like, it was a real time for us to sit down and say, okay, how do we make this better now? And you're right, it was to reach out to those parents and to those kids saying, okay, what do you need? You know, for us, we worked the whole entire spring. All 300 employees worked all spring. And it was making those connections with the parents, reaching out. You're right, we had every phone number, every email to say, what is it that you need? How can we connect you to whatever resource it was that you needed, whether it was, I need a hotspot, or I need, you know, what is the food distribution grab and go? And we were fortunate that at most of those grab and goes, we were there with a resource or a snack, or we made little activity packs for the kids that had all the supplies and the instructions of how to take that home and actually do an art project or something like that. We had a YouTube channel that my staff was recording activities or recording positive messages. I recorded positive messages for my students and for our staff that we would push out on social media, or we would push out on our YouTube channel. And because we had those connections, we were able to email this link to all of our parents, email this video to the parents of this school. You know, tell them that we're at the food distribution, we're going to be handing out activity packs for them to be able to do something at home and be connected that way. You know, for us, it was kind of changing our thinking of, okay, how do we stay connected to our kids and our families when they're not in front of us anymore? And so we utilized our social media platforms, our YouTube channels, and access wherever we could find parents, whether it was at the grab and go meal distribution, or they were doing a virtual parent orientation. You know, we invited ourselves to every kind of, you know, forum. I sat on a community forum for almost every single one of my districts. And if they were going to do kinder registration, we had somebody there. And just, you know, just keeping that connection. But we were fortunate because we had access to our parents. We worked for those 5 months of making sure that they knew we were coming back. We were going to be here. We were going to be there to service them when they needed us. And, you know, I mean, we're still doing it now. We have our own, you know, there's an email address that goes directly to me. There's also a COVID-19 email address of asking questions, asking, you know, what our protocols are, things like that. So, I mean, it's just kind of pushing everything out in any way that we can to make sure that they understand that we are still here. We didn't close just because everybody else did, you know, and so.
Great. Thank you, Marie. And Gary, for you, in terms of, one thing is access, right? Having access to parents, but another thing is to have, to be a person of trust, right? To those families, right? So how did your school district deal with the information going out? I remember very early, Elk Grove Unified, where I live in Northern California, was one of the first school districts to shut down school. And a lot of parents were not too happy about the decision. At that time, we didn't know a lot about COVID-19. It was sort of an unpopular decision. How did your district go about informing parents, continuing the conversation with parents, and still till today, how do you connect with parents to let them know the latest, even when we sometimes don't know?
Yeah, that's a great question because, you know, our parents reacted sort of differently than yours did up in Elk Grove because we were a couple of hours after LAUSD was announcing we were going to close. So there was some anxiety from our parents wanting to hear from us as to what our plans were. So, you know, but I'll take a step back a month prior to the pandemic. I had been pushing to hire a public information officer for our district. We had a couple incidents, a couple crises that our staff internally was working to message about, and it just wasn't in any of our wheelhouses or areas of expertise to message the community in a crisis. We had a firm that we're working with, but the firm also covered like 30 other districts. So their response time to us was not as fast as we needed it to be. So a month prior, we worked to hire and approve a public information officer whose job was to make sure that every single school site had a social media page, a website, and a crisis and communication plan. We didn't know that we'd be putting it to the test a month later, but it was definitely to our benefit that we had this person in place because what was important was that information was going out quickly on every platform possible, that it was trusted, and that it was vetted in order to reduce sort of the panic around the pandemic itself, but to make sure that parents were properly informed. And just to talk about the first 48 hours of school closures, there's a couple community groups on Facebook where parents go to vent about stuff. It's a crime watch page. People they go and gossip, you name it. But for whatever reason, that's sort of where parents lived for information for a couple of days. So I was probably on that page answering questions till about 2 a.m. that first day. and for most of the rest of that first Monday. My goal being on the page was to have folks go to their school's websites or to the district's website so we can trust information that they were getting was the accurate and most timely information. I would say in about a week's time, that place no longer was the landing page for parents that had questions, and now they could go to each of their various school sites. And that was very, very important because information has to go out timely, has to be efficient and effective, and has to be accurate. But those pages historically were not that. They were, gossip, rumor mills, but weren't information that you could trust to ensure that people were remaining safe and informed in the time of a pandemic. And I would say today, like I've few and far between I've seen any parent complaints or questions on those pages. Now they know that it can go to the trusted source, being their school's website or the district website, or even the board members that respond to their questions and concerns. And that's really what you want to have happen, that there's a system in place, that there's protocols that are being enacted so that if information is going to the right people in the right time. And again, from my marketing background, we had a saying that one ad does not fit all. So you couldn't just send a text, you couldn't just call, you couldn't just email, you couldn't do social media one platform at a time. It was all of the systems working together at the same time to ensure that the information was uniform, but it was going out from the trusted sources, and we were able to inform parents as to one, that we were there for them, and two, what was going to happen day to day. And I think that's the part that created the most anxiety, is just that the fear of the unknown for parents, not being able to plan their days without knowing what the district was going to do from day to day. So as soon as we knew or made decisions about anything, we made sure that we got a release out to the public so that they knew what to expect going forward as well.
You're on mute, Teri. Teri, you're on mute. And so,
speaking of questions and answers, be sure and put your questions and answers in the Q&A section, because we will be answering questions later in the program. So be sure and get those typed in. So Mary, how are you addressing those kids who aren't paying attention, aren't staying focused in class? You used to be able to walk over and stand next to them and just subtly be present to encourage their activity. How are you doing that now?
Well, it's definitely much more difficult than it used to be. You're right. The very subtle walk over, put my hand on the desk, point to where we're at kind of thing, that doesn't work anymore. So I am very fortunate that my class is pretty tech savvy and has figured out the chat box and on Zoom. And the chat box, I have placed it so that they cannot chat with each other, just so it's not super distracting and them not sending messages to each other, but they all come to me. So I am easily able to send a quick message to them. If that doesn't work, I have done a breakout group where I've taken them aside and talked to them one-on-one. It is very helpful that I have students with IEPs in my classroom, and we have a push-in model at our school. So I oftentimes have another adult in my Zoom meetings with me. And so it's very easy to be able to let her take over for a moment while I move aside with another child and have a conversation with them. Sometimes I've had to wait until the end, especially if it's something that I've already reminded them about multiple times. And in my office hours, I call them for my office hour and have them stick around and have a conversation with that child. But I have been pretty fortunate that we're still in the honeymoon period with only 18 days into school. So it's been rather successful. Those little reminders here and there in the chat box has really been very helpful, because that's just like it's private little message that I send off to them, and usually they look at it and they know. We also have something called Go Guardian, where I can actually see the kids' computer screens, and there is a messaging system within that pops up on their screen. So I can actually send them a message that I know that they will see, because it pops up right in front of them. And so I can send messages to the whole class that way, or a private message if I see something happening that shouldn't be happening during learning time.
And Mary, you're getting a lot of questions on the Q&A chat box. So thank you so much for submitting your question. So I'll just ask you one, because you mentioned earlier about identifying new kids with trauma being a hurdle. But from a school district perspective, your school district, what has been the training over the summer? What is the policy for like individualized education plans? How do we identify these kids that may need additional resources, help, or something different?
So I am actually a part of, my school district, my school, I can only speak on behalf of my school because I'm not sure how other campuses are handling this, but I am a part of a PBIS group where we actually had a meeting yesterday, and
that's positive behavior interventions.
Yes, sorry. And we actually had a meeting yesterday, and that's where we discuss about students who, yesterday the topic was really about who is not getting on to Zoom meetings or Google Meet meetings with their teachers, and what we're doing to help combat that. I know that we have a form that teachers can fill out that comes directly to our group, and then we are able to discuss those. Our principal has gone on several to get those kids and encourage them to come on to meetings. We've got several different programs on our campus to try to get some of those kids who whose families cannot, they're essential workers, and so they need that support from school still. And so we actually have a day camp on our campus with it's 40 kids per campus that are coming onto campus and actually learning on campus. They're all spaced out. There is an adult in the room. They're all wearing masks. So in the way of identifying those kids, it's the teachers that really have to do that within their classrooms. And then it comes to that PBIS group, and we try to help identify and solve those problems within that group.
Great. Thank you, Mary. So Marie, I want to turn it over to you because we've been talking about student trauma, but I also know to be true that a lot of the educators and ourselves as adults are experiencing trauma ourselves. And so you obviously hire a lot of folks from your own community. A lot of them are college students that are operating in these expanded learning programs. A lot of them perhaps lost a job, lost, multiple jobs. They're having food insecurity themselves, sleep deprivation, loss of concentration, and a lot of the other symptoms that have come from this. How have you dealt, or what have you seen from your own staff of adults that perhaps are also going through trauma through these times?
Yes, and that's exactly right. We have a large staff, but it's very traumatic for a lot of our employees. They've either, their children are home, spouses have lost jobs, or they're caring for we've had upwards of 60 people on leave. 60. That's 20% of my staff. And so, we've been very diligent about making sure that we address the whole social emotional piece. And even before we went into closure, we did some very extensive professional development on trauma-informed care, social emotional learning, everything from losing a job, from losing a child, to CPS, risk assessment, threat assessment, suicide. We did the signs of suicide for adults and for kids. And so we worked very closely with Tulare County Health and Human Services. We worked very closely with Family Healthcare Network. We did some training on the pandemic effects of children and how the trauma from the adult transfers to the kids, transfers into their interaction with us. We've already called CPS and law enforcement a couple of times for the kids who are in our day programs. So we know it's far reaching. It's just not the kids, but it's the loss of connection. It's the unknown. It's the insecurity of not knowing, will I ever go back? Will I ever see my friends? Will I ever do any of that? And And also that academic piece of, I'm struggling with distance learning. I don't know how to do this. I'm not doing well. I'm not going to graduate. I'm not going to get an A. And things like that. And so for us as an organization, we have really focused on the professional development piece and preparing our staff of how to be able to handle those. We've talked about what that positive message looks like. Everything it's a uniform message. It's a positive message. Like Mary said, this is the best we can do in this difficult situation. We know this is not ideal. We know that this is uncomfortable and hard for everybody, but how do we make it the best scenario for a difficult time? But it really is, as Mary said, just really, really, really paying attention to the different behavior. All of a sudden, you're a great program leader and you're up and bubbling and things like that. And now all of a sudden, we have them where they don't want to go in the classrooms. They don't want to interact with a kid. They don't want to talk to a parent. And so it's really paying attention so that the admin staff can be there to say, what do you need? What's going on? And things like that. We spent the entire 5 months in closure just doing intensive professional development. And it's gotten to the point now where we're calling people in and tell us what's going on. We meet weekly. The site coordinators meet weekly. They talk about staff. They talk about the behavior of staff. Are we seeing something different? Is there something that we need to address with them? Because the kids are going to feed off of the adults. And so unless we put somebody in those classrooms with those kids that is positive and upbeat and being able to be intuitive for those kids and ask the right questions. We've worked with our districts on risk assessment, asking what those questions to those kids to determine if there is something that needs to be addressed at a mental health level or something along those lines. But it's really just paying attention to how people are acting, because they will show you what they're feeling.
Gary, what kind of policies did your district put in place regarding professional development on that kind of issue?
There was, I think in addition to the pandemic, there's a lot of social uprisings going on, and our staff and students and parents all expressed some anxiety and needing an outlet. And we were sort of watching and monitoring social media one night and just saw students crying out for help, parents too. So we created spaces where our staff, our students, our families can come and just talk about what they're feeling, but also in our own small community work towards uniting around solutions to make our beloved community that much better. So I think part of it is just recognizing that there is a need to create space for outlet for people within the systems that each school has. Our schools have a robust health collaborative with 30 partners from, you name the resource, we have it in our collaborative. So, aligning folks with resources was about, referrals. But what we saw was much more than just what we could offer in our mental health collaborative or our health collaboratives. We needed to create spaces for people to have an outlet. And that's what being able to go out and go to the movies and go to dinner and what have you, see family, for a lot of people often look like. And now that is gone in the wake of this pandemic. So we had to create other avenues for that to still take place. And they were successful. We had hundreds of parents on each town hall or each thought talk, coffee with the principal. They were all themed in such a way that allow people to have an outlet to express concerns, to ask questions, not of the norm, but really about how they were feeling in the wake of how the world looks now. And it's a very anxious, intense environment, but it's important that we provided the outlet. And one thing that I'll mention, you may have seen in national news, there was a shooting of 2 deputies in our community in the city of Compton, which is about 5 minutes from where I live. It's the next door city to Lynwood. And just last week on Tuesday, we had an incident with the barricaded suspect next door to my house. So we were right in the middle of distance learning when SWAT teams knocked on our doors and were searching in people's garages or homes for the suspect. That is a situation that immediately created trauma for our kids because many of the kids didn't know what was going on. And these weren't the normal police. They were the SWAT teams with the huge guns and dogs, right? So we have to be aware of that as a school district, and immediately made the community know that we had a hotline available. And that, you know, we instructed our staff to don't do any assessments that week. Give kids a chance to sort of stop and pause and have an outlet. As a district, our policy is simple. We are nimble in that we will shift and do what is necessary to support our kids, that we will support practices and policies that don't add to trauma, but that address trauma with such nuance that's built around equity, that each kid gets what they need, and being able to respond to these systems. I mean, there's situations in a way that allow people to have the, you know, needed outlet is important, because when you don't have the outlet, that's when you have people acting out in such a way that isn't productive. And I think that was part of the reason why that shouldn't happen in the first place. Too often with these issues, there is no space for conversation. There is no space for downloading thoughts and feelings, and people act and react and act out in such a way that is, you know, typically not productive. And that's what we saw. So we wanted to make sure that we were doing the right thing and supporting our families any way we could. Any type of trauma that arise from the community, because past practice and research told us that it has a measured impact on education and academia. So we wanted to make sure that we were nimble and responsive to that as well.
Thank
Mary,
you.
how is your school district running? How is your school running your wellness center now in this virtual world? How are you getting kids referred to that? How are you being sure they actually go and utilize the services? How's that working?
So this is brand new. This just launched yesterday, and the district has been talking about this for a while. They have hired teachers and staff from our district to actually help run that, because it's all virtual. It's a virtual tutoring center as well for kids who are requesting help, or parents that need help, extra help from educators for their child's schoolwork. Now, because this was just launched yesterday, we don't obviously know how well this is working so far, because it's brand new, but I do know that it is more like a self-help. So they would have to go to the website, they would have to fill out and create an appointment, and then the appropriate staff would be able to help them from there. So I hope to have more information on that soon. But as of right now, like I said, it just came out. They are available. So Monday through Thursdays between 3 and 8 p.m. to try to help with parents who are working. That's when they're like the virtual hours are. And then Fridays from 3 to 5. So just to try to help to reach as many people as possible. And they just sign up for any of the help or any of the services that are provided.
So I have a question for the three of you, and we'll start with you, Gary. You know, as we talk about what is causing stress, right? For me right now, these days, going on my social media page is causing me stress. Watching the news is causing me stress. But for a lot of parents and educators, this idea or concept of distance learning, doing it through a Chromebook or an iPad, is causing stress. So from an education perspective of how do we keep scope, sequence, how do we make it relevant in the world of that child, and how, more importantly, how do we keep it engaging so that the learning is all of those things? What have you seen, what have you done that you can share with us around how do we keep scope, sequence, relevancy, and engagement through distance learning that's causing a lot of people calling me saying, why is fourth grade math so hard?
Well, I'm a parent myself, and I'm also working at home with a third grader who has emerged as one of the, I guess, most vocal leaders in her class. She is helping with the classroom environment here at home. So I'm on Zoom calls and hearing her in the background talking to her classmates, reminding them that they should be quiet and on task. But I think that the thing that I saw that has the most impact was a routine. What we've seen right now is so far from the norm. Our kids are used to being able to get up at a certain time. They have a bell or alarm that gets them ready to school. There's a bell for recess, a bell for when school ends. They're used to a routine, and that routine for kids provides a sense of normalcy, but also it is a way to prevent stress and anxiety. For children, the unknown is a common stressor. For my daughter, if we were getting in the car right now and started driving, she would ask me 1,000 times where we're going until I told her where we were going. And I think in the world of distance learning, it's important to make sure that parents, as much as possible, have a routine for their children. So I've seen some parents get up and still put their students in the school uniform, so they would normally during the school year. I've seen parents adhere to their teachers' recess. So when it's recess time, the kids are outside playing, and kids are also doing PE a variety of ways. But when you give children that needed structure, it provides for an environment that is conducive to learning, and that is really the goal. I think the challenge is when that environment is not feasible at home. You may have households where 4 children at different grade levels, all hoping the Wi-Fi works in their favor that day, or hoping that their siblings or their home is quiet enough for their class session. So I think, as much as possible, some routine and pattern of how days go helps. But we also know that we have to be, as educators, aware of that we may have set great policies, but great policies work when they understand that the best case scenario may not be available for each person you're seeking to work for. So I know Mary can speak to it more, having to sort of have the nuanced approach to her classrooms, and Marie as well with her out of school time learning, is that you just cannot assume the best environment for each kid, and you have to do what you can to address that nuance. But again, that if you at the very minimum have a suggested routine and pattern and practice, then you could sort of accomplish a little thing around creating some normalcy, but also start to point out or recognize some of those things, that those behaviors that maybe signals that maybe signaling some trauma or needed support.
Marie?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think it's that stability and that routine, because that reduces their stressor. For us, it's making sure that what we create looks as much like school as it possibly can be. I mean, they're doing their distance learning on their Chromebooks, and my staff is assisting with that. But I mean, as I said, and as Gary said, there's recess, there's lunch, there's picture day, there's dress up day. And, we were fortunate that I've kept the same staff with the same students. So, I mean, they know these people. So it's familiar, even though we're not on school sites. They're not at school. They're not in their traditional classroom, but they know these people. It's still Mr. Miguel and Miss Mary and things like that, who they've already known. So it wasn't foreign to them. The routines are exactly the same as it was when it was in February. Now they have to wear a mask and stay 6 feet apart, but it's still the same expectations and the same processes. They check in, they know they sign in, they go to class, they have to, my granddaughter's 6. And so she was like, I'm going to school, but I go to school on the computer. But she's in the same place. And so with the same people around her. And, and it's making sure that they know what the expectations are from the very beginning. And because it's the unknown that scares them. And so if they know that they're going to the same place with the same people, doing the same thing, there's always going to be a person there that cares about them. There's always going to be a hot spot so that they can get on and they don't have to worry that I'm not going to be able to do school today. They always know that there's going to be a snack at 3 o'clock. They always know that they're going to go outside. It's keeping that consistency for them, I think helps reduce that trauma. It's also dealing with whatever barriers we know that they have. Food insecurity. I didn't bring a lunch today. No problem, we have a shelf stable. I can't find my water bottle. No problem, we've got one. I can't find my mask. No problem, we have one. And so it's anticipating what's going to be the barrier, because everybody is, it is such a different environment that any little thing causes trauma in their life. And so if we can be kind of ahead of the curve and anticipate, okay, what do we know that they're going to need, and we provide it before they even know that they need it, then we don't even take them to that trauma. And so I think what keeps me up at night is being in front of that 8 ball, knowing that, okay, waivers are coming. What's it going to look like for us? Hybrid models are going to come, as students transition back onto school sites. What does that mean for us? And so, it's living 6 weeks ahead of the time so that we can be prepared for what it is our students and our families and our community needs before they even need it. And so I think that's where I kind of live.
Yep. Mary?
So I completely agree about the routine, keeping the routine. We do the same things not the same exact lessons, obviously, but the same subjects and the same, we still have PE that we do with our PE teacher who still comes in and to our Zoom, and it's wonderful, but we really keep that routine every single day. I do similar things in Zoom that I do in class, in person. I never say the words, well, if we were in school, or well, if we were in person, because I don't want them to think that they're getting something less because we're on Zoom. And obviously we're not in person and we don't physically get to be in the same space, but they're not getting, in my mind, less, because I'm trying so hard to continue with that and doing the things that we would do similarly to the way we would do them in class. Bruno, you had asked about keeping the kids engaged. And as a teacher, that is a huge struggle, especially because sitting in front of a computer is so different than the way it used to be. And so something that I have just totally gone into, probably more than I should have, is using Bitmojis and using videos and using Nearpod. And these are all things that are new to me, new to the kids, but it's the way that I'm keeping them engaged and excited. And there's something, although we have the same routine, it's something different each day. And I think it keeps them on their toes a little bit, like, oh, what is she gonna do today? So I'm working all the time to keep that going, but routine, really.
So Teri is going to get us to our questions from our questions and answers. Teri, do you have some questions from our questions and answers?
Yeah, Mary, how do you identify kids who aren't getting great support at home on all of this? And how, not because their parents, some of them, their parents don't care, let's be honest. And others, their parents are so overwhelmed with the other kids, with the job situation, with everything. How do you identify those kids and help them in this process?
So I have had a few situations with some of my students in that manner. It is a lot harder when I don't have parent participation or parent support. And I continue to tell my families every single time I talk to them, thank you so much. I wouldn't be able to do this without you. And I continue to try to encourage them to take part in their child's education, because if it wasn't for them setting up somewhere for them to sit or making sure that they're waking up at a reasonable time to get to class, I really couldn't do my job. It's not as easy as it used to be, obviously. And so it's been difficult, but I have to say, I think that parents have stepped up more this year than I have ever noticed in the past. Not all of them, but I have been able to reach all but one parent through Dojo, through email, that's the most I've ever had, because a lot of times parents rely on the, oh, I'll see her after school, I'll catch her on the, you know, on the way to the office or as my kid's coming out the door. And so this year there is no more of that. And I made that very clear in the beginning to families. I called them before school started, and I sent postcards before school started, and I tried to reach out to them as much as possible to let them know that this year more than ever, get on my class dojo, which I do use for parent communication. Email me. I can try to call you when I'm on campus or from my phone. Unfortunately, they would have to call the office back for me to connect with them. But I do know that the struggle is there for some families who are just not connected to school, and just continuing to try. I don't stop. I keep trying all the time to connect with the families. And that's really all I can say about that, is just keep calling, keep sending emails, eventually they're going to have a question, and eventually they're going to need to reach out. And whether that's to me or to our office staff or to our principal, eventually they're going to need something. And that's how we're going to connect.
And Marie, are you noticing, how do you notice when kids aren't keeping up with their schoolwork? Are they sharing that, or do you just come across that?
Well, and I was gonna jump on. We also use the resource of the site administrators. I've had principals that have called that said, you know, so-and-so hasn't logged on, or a teacher who has called that says, Marie hasn't turned in anything for her asynchronous work. And so, you know, like Mary said, you just kind of keep asking, and you just kind of keep asking everybody. You know, you ask the parents, you ask the principals, you ask the teachers. And, you know, we've been fortunate. We work very closely, or I work very closely with my district administration. And so, especially in some of our rural communities, they've come to us and said, these 20 kids have not logged on one day since school started. And so for us, that's us outreaching to our parents and our families that we know in that community and say, okay, what is it that you need? I mean, we went out and deployed 10 hotspots to 10 families in one day that just said, here, you guys need this. And we're going to be at this church, and, you know, and the kids have come, and that's how we, you know, that's how we get them connected. But yeah, no, we've had our school districts contact us directly and say, we need you to do program in this rural community because our kids are not connected and can't do their schoolwork. And so we've had teachers call or email that say, can you follow up on these 3 kids? They're either not logging on, or they're getting kicked off, or they're not completing work. And so, and then, you know, then our staff then addresses those if they're in program. But because, you know, as Gary said, we're a trusted person to them. You know, we have their babies after school, some of them for years. And so they trust my program leaders and my site directors more than, you know, than probably anybody. And so it's easier for, you know, my Spanish speaking site director to call a mom who doesn't speak English that says, hey, you know, your child hasn't been online. What do you need from us? And so it's just, you know, as Mary said, you just keep asking, and you keep asking everybody of what do they need, who needs help, what do you need for us to do, and things like that. And it's, you know, I can say we opened 2 new sites yesterday in 2 of our rural communities, and everybody was online. Everybody was connected. Everybody was doing their work at 8:20 in the morning like they're supposed to. I mean, my staff went out and went, everything's fine. There's nothing to do. It's quiet. I was like, good. That's a good thing, you know. But, you know, when you have somebody who lives in a way rural, you know, and has 8 kids in the house, you know, 1 hotspot, you know, helps, but there's a little bit more that, you know, that you need to do. And it's also that constant follow-up. You know, as Mary said, it's calling, saying, how's it going? What do you need? Or I noticed this. It's really paying attention now. You know, before it was, you know, you had them in class and you could kind of tell, and you touched base with mom on pick up and drop off and things like that, you know. But now it's really paying attention to go, you know what? You know, Marie didn't turn this in now. Or, you know what? Marie didn't log on, or she was only on for 45 minutes and, you know, and things like that. So it's just really being intuitive now because we don't have the luxury of being of that in-person connection anymore.
What kind of things are you hearing parents asking for? You, Marie, you talked about your outreaching to them, and Gary, you talked about outreaching. What are parents asking for? What are parents needing?
You know, for us, we're a community of essential workers. So we find a lot of, I need somewhere for my child to go while I'm at work. And how do I do this distance learning thing? You know, in the spring, it was kind of a reaction. And so for us in most of our districts, it was, here's a packet and here's some grab and go meals, go home and just do something. It wasn't graded, it wasn't collected, it wasn't anything like that. And at that time, a lot of us were home. I was home for 5 months. I had my granddaughter every other day. And so it was different. And then when school started, it was like, okay, now all of a sudden this means something. And now they're getting called on the carpet when they're going, hey, your kid hasn't logged on. When in 5 months before, that wasn't the case. And so now I think it's one of the level of importance that you have to now be engaged of what's happening with your child. And so what, you know, like I said, what we're finding is there's that childcare issue of a safe place for my child to be. I mean, I have over 350 kids in program right now. I have a waiting list of 222 kids as of this morning. And I have parents who call daily going, my kids are struggling. My kids are struggling at home, trying to do this distance learning at home. My kid's in the 5th grade, I can't do algebra, you know, and how do they miss their friends. They miss that interconnection of being with other kids in that school setting. And so, you know, that's what we're finding is that twofold of they need a safe place for their kids to be who can help them, you know, one, academically, but two, it's that social emotional piece of being connected to the world that they understand and that they thrive for. We had a group of kids that were actually put into quarantine for 14 days because we had somebody test positive on site. And daily the kids were, I want to go back to school. And because again, like we said, it's that routine, it's that known for them. And so, but for parents, for us, it's really that safe place where they can go and somebody who can help them with their distance learning and make sure that they're doing it accurately and that the kids are actually engaged in doing it versus sitting in front of a screen with grandma or being at home with, I mean, the call that I had this morning was a woman with 3 kids and all 3 kids are staying home and the oldest child is 13. And that 13-year-old is the one that's making sure that the other 2 younger ones are doing their distance learning. And so it's, you know, it's heavy on the heart.
Teri, what are you hearing about the parents? What are the specific resources that they could be using?
Great, that was a great question in the chat, you know, and it was any and everything you could think of in all honesty. But most things we could, as a district, respond to with a resource or a partner, or we had it in our inventory. Speaking of hotspots, you know, Chromebooks, the supportive services, counseling, that was all within our wheelhouse. But one of the major needs in our community was rental assistance and assistance with utilities. And, you know, cities were doing their best to, you know, put in place moratoriums and eviction protections, but it just wasn't enough. It wasn't the peace of mind that allowed families to just, you know, wait out the pandemic and focus on distance learning. So what we did as a district, we have a educational foundation that's our partner, and we raised about $50,000 to provide rental assistance to our family. So at least what they had was some peace of mind in that, you know, they could stay where they were for the time being as long as possible. But I think one of the major things that was an area of need was help with troubleshooting IT issues. It's been said over and over again that distance learning is new for each and every person involved, from our teachers to our admin, to our parents, to our students, our school board. It's all new for us. And you're asking parents, some of which who did not have working emails besides the ones that they use for those free promos, to now assist their children with getting on Google Classrooms and downloading assignments and answering questions on Class Dojo and what have you. So it was just a new world, and we had to find a way to provide real-time assistance. So what we did as a district, we created a policy. We went out and found a grant funding of $500,000 to allow us to hire 20 digital learning coaches for the distance learning period, so that parents could call in for support, but also teachers who also had some of the same issues with connectivity, but also that they were just, you know, they started teaching a generation ago. Also, teachers in Lynwood have been here for 40 plus years, and they're still teaching here today. And, you know, email and websites and Bitmojis and Nearpod are just not a language that they speak, but they are tools that make learning engagement and real for kids in this environment that they just did not have the capacity to really undertake and work. So there was from the district level, you know, we hear all of the complaints and little praise. So we had a lot of little fires to put out, but we tried our best to make sure that our district was responding to all the need that we can, and not just saying it wasn't our job. You know, we don't provide rental assistance as a district, but we found a way to make sure that it happened. And even as a district, we had challenges. We tried to do a live webinar, Facebook town hall, and my staff had never used Facebook Live before. So now from that experience, we have a saying that we will stay the course until we get it right. Because that town hall, when I tell you, was an absolute disaster for the first hour. But the last hour and a half or so was the most engaging and informative town hall that we could have ever provided, because we didn't give up, we didn't quit, we stayed the course until we got it right. And now we have that as one of our weekly practices. Our parents can get on in real time and check in with us. So districts have a heavy lift with ensuring, you know, the world doesn't crumble around us. And, you know, one thing that I'll say, you know, I was proud to lead districts from Southern California in sending a letter to the governor and the state Senate and state assembly, pushing back on K-12 cuts. If those cuts had stayed in place, I don't think there'd be many school districts that will be providing a quality education that they're proud of today. It was down to the penny that we had to fight to make sure that there were no cuts for kids over education. Each and every other industry had the privilege of taking a few weeks off, taking a month off, and sort of waiting this out. Not K-12 education. We were up and running from the first day schools were closed. You know, we had more work to do in a lot of cases. We incurred more costs than we normally would, from providing extra supplies for sanitation and cleanliness, from providing hazard pay to some employees, for providing technology and devices. We've incurred millions more than we normally would during the regular school year. So, you know, from my standpoint, what has kept me awake at night is making sure we stay in the black, and that as much as possible, families do as well, that we are really trying to minimize the harm that this has really caused our communities. And it's in some ways it's been a nightmare, but in some ways it's been a pleasant surprise. We've seen our community come together and check on neighbors, raise funds, you name it. But I think just it has been a lesson, and I'll say it over and over again, of how important education is to communities. We often get the short end of the stick. We're often thought of as the little brother of city councils, but you know, I was envying my city council when they didn't have to answer questions about how they're going to ensure kids learn or how families stay together. But you know, I haven't had a day off since March, and I'm also right now running for re-election and working full time and schooling at home. So I'm like, you know, when I have a 10-minute window to just do nothing, it's a vacation for me. But, you know, I just, you know, again, it's been a pleasure to serve, but more so it just drills home the point daily how important, how vital quality education is, and how important it is to have districts to have their bottom line be educational success for families, not just employing adults.
Mary, what kind of advice do you have for teachers who don't feel like they're getting support from their administration in this? There are lots of challenges. What would you suggest?
So that's a really hard one because I'm very fortunate that for the last 7 years, I've worked with an amazing principal who has supported me in every adventure, every crazy lesson, every request. So I'm very fortunate with that. But unfortunately, I know not every teacher is feeling that way. And my best advice is I think that we as teachers need to lean on each other for support. We can't do this alone. We have to use collaboration and use our grade level teams and other staff members at our school site and at other school sites. I have a group of teachers that none of us teach at the same school. We're just friends outside of it. And we have really shared resources and lessons and different fun things to keep our kids engaged with each other. We have to use each other during this time and really motivate. We have to self-motivate a lot of the time for this. This isn't easy, which I know I've continued to say multiple times because it truly isn't. And we really have to use our resources that we have around us in each other if we're not getting that support from admin.
Someone noted that Gary and Marie, you both seem to have real proactive approaches for mental health for your educators and your staff. And they're curious if that was a shift or is that the status quo? Did you already have that in your programs?
We've been doing that from the very beginning. I mean, Bruno knows that I'm a former training manager, so professional development has always been a real high priority for me because I know we can't give to the children if my adult staffs are not taken care of. And so we use a lot of online. We had purchased online professional development before we even went into closure, which was a godsend when school closed. But it's always been a real focus I have a director of professional development. That's what she does in making sure that all of our staff has all the resources that they need to be able to provide for our kids. And so we do everything from classroom management, and my staff is in the classrooms making sure that they have the practical support as well as that as the theory. We do everything from trauma-informed care, social emotional learning. The county comes and does a lot of training for us. Everything from mandated reporting to risk assessment, threat assessment, what their role is in making sure that they are part of the county solution. And for the families, it's, as Gary said, we have direct contact with the child, but we know that if we don't provide for the families, that it affects that child. And so it's everything from being able to give them resources. We have a resource guide that we hand out. We have, our normal orientations that when we were in session that we held on a regular basis with our families and things like that. So yeah, I mean, I like to plan. I like to be ahead of the ball. I like to be proactive and not reactive, because when we're reactive, then sometimes we don't make the best decisions. And so I like to make decisions that are best for children, that are best for adults. But I also know that I have to take care of the adults so that they can take care of my kids.
I want to highlight something that is very crucial in this conversation is in that, for example, Marie mentioned that she has a director of professional development. Gary mentioned that he had hired a marketing director. And so, show me your budget and I'll show you the things that you care about, right? And it's putting very intentional thought into those positions or those policies or crafting those systems. One of the things is, particularly in times of uncertainty, clarity moves people forward, and it could start with a simple messaging in language. For example, I'm seeing some of the best educators that have been teaching for 25 years say things like, go find a quiet space, or go find a blank wall at your house, or grab your iPad. And those are messages, perhaps kids don't have that readily available in their current situation. So even the best of the best who have been doing this for a long time, Gary used the word reimagine. And how do we reimagine education in this new environment moving forward? And it can start with language. It can start with positive messages. It can start with policies that are written in a way that bring people together and encompass. And like Marie said, it's about putting students and families first. Do you have any examples for either of the three of you of language that has either been put in place that has highlighted some of those positive messages to bring clarity to families, or any negative messages that you have seen that have caused perhaps more confusion during this time?
I think for me, it's really about, I think more so than the message, about our reaction to issues that we see in certain households and having empathy. I think what you highlighted has been our message to our teachers. I think the messaging to our teachers and staff has been almost equally as important as the one that goes to our parents and students. And I started off our school year with a PD session with our teachers, telling a story about myself and how important my teacher was in my second grade year. And that, at its core, that for me, my teacher, forget academia, she loved her students, and we saw it each and every way. And what that meant was that she was patient and kind and understanding for what the students' needs were above her own. And I think that what you are highlighting in the fact that, again, our students don't often live in the best cases. Like some families are living in a house where there are 4 other families. Some families are living in converted garages. Some families may be homeless. There may be foster youth. And to approach each family in the same way would be a disservice to them. We have an equity, access, and inclusion department in Lynwood, and it's been their job to hold those trainings so that we make sure that our staff is appropriately addressing the issues that we're seeing across the board in our district. And that is not to say that our district is full of the disadvantaged. We are under-resourced, but so resilient and have a ton of grit, where we've seen teachers and parents alike do their best to make it work. And one specific example that as I'm thinking of as I'm sitting here is there's a picture of our teacher of the year sitting in her bathtub using her tile as a whiteboard and teaching her kids with her 2-year-old son in her lap as she does it. And that's just, I think, my image of what this has looked like. It's just really just going the extra mile whenever you can and doing what it takes to make sure that you're providing a quality education for kids. So I think just that messaging around returning teaching back to its core, to its initial purpose, and that is building strong young people so we don't have to repair broken adults, as Frederick Douglass often said. So.
Yep. Thank you. Marie, you wanted to add?
Well, I was just going to say, it's really it's not making those assumptions, as you said. We assume that you say, go get your iPad or go get your crayons and things like that, and not, a lot of times it's just not there. And so for us, again, it's thinking ahead of, okay, my kids are going to need their Chromebooks, that they're going to need a whiteboard, or they're going to need this. I'm not going to make the assumption that they have it. And so, one, how do we make sure that they have it? Or two, what are we going to do in case they don't? And so it's really not making and removing the barrier for the child that says, I don't have a whiteboard, or I don't have connectivity, or I don't have that. It's preparing for the fact that they don't. Mm-hmm. If they do, great, but we prepare almost for the fact that they don't. Mm-hmm. And so then if we live there, then those that do have it, then they feel good about it. Then those that don't, they're not put in that awkward situation of, because, you know, as I tell my staff, this situation is really going to be able to tell the difference between the haves and the have-nots.
Sure.
The gap is going to get bigger of, I can hire a tutor for my granddaughter and she'll be fine. And she's got connectivity and she does have an iPad, but there are those that don't. And so it's trying to close that gap of access and equity, in the fact that I want to make sure that every child, all 500 of them, don't have to say, well, I don't have that, you know. So it's either we're going to provide it or we're going to do something else so that you don't have to have it and feel that you're inferior to anybody else. That, you know, we've bought thousands of hotspots, spend thousands of dollars on hotspots that, you know, we have districts. I call, you know, and, you know, we use them as partners, but if you're not going to provide it, I'm going to, and we're going to figure out how to do that. But I don't ever want a child to feel that they cannot because they don't have. And so I can't believe it's the top of the hour and we're going to have to close this. So I want to close this with one last question for the three of you. But before that, I definitely just want to just extend my gratitude, how thankful I am. This has been a very candid conversation with a lot of tangible examples of what's happening, you know, in this new environment of education and addressing, you know, student trauma for not only the students, but for their families. So within that, you know, we do have to reimagine the way we do business. We do have to continue these conversations. So my last question is about, how do we lead with love and empathy moving forward as we continue to figure these things out? So my question is, I'll start with you, Mary. You know, we have a lot of parents that have joined this session, and you know, and we have a lot of school teachers that have also joined this session. And so they're listening and they're asking questions, and they're also grateful for this great participation. If you had an opportunity to speak to a student or their families right in front of you now, what would you like to say to them in this moment of uncertainty? Is there anything that you would tell them if you had one of your students and family members in front of you right now?
I think the biggest takeaway from this entire experience is that for me, that I have to keep reminding myself every day that everything's going to be okay, that everything will return one day, who knows when, but things will return to quote unquote normal, and whatever that looks like. But it's going to be okay. And kids are so resilient. And we have now created a society that can function, and kids that can function online. Let's look at what our future looks like. Our future is online. Our future are with kids and, you know, as adults working on computers and collaborating online. You know, I can't tell you how many jobs that there are now and that there will be in the future of someone sitting in their house working and talking to someone in another country, in another time zone. And we've really created, I think, these kids who can now function in a society like that, because as from what I see, that's where we're headed. And more and more, I think from this, people are going to end up working from home 100% of the time, because they're realizing, oh, I can do my job from home. I don't need to go into an office space. So these kids are experiencing this now. And I think that although not ideal, they're better off in a way because of this, because they are resilient, and we are going to get through this, and it's going to be okay. And that's what I want to tell my families, and why I have told my families before. It's going to be okay.
No, thank you for that. You know, when we think about the 4 C's of 21st century skills: communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and creativity, we're all having to adjust and readjust as we speak. Marie, what is the message of hope that you would give to a student and their family members if you had them in front of you?
Well, I mean, and I completely agree with, you know, with Mary. I mean, it's a positive message. You know, I tell my staff, I mean, my staff meeting this morning was, we got this. We know how to do this. It's a different environment. Protocols are different, but we know how to care for kids. And we know how, you know, we know how to do this. And so it's really being reflective of how do we make it better. And it is that positive message that all's going to be okay. This isn't the best environment. We know that. We know that the kids belong back in school and doing that. We got that. But this is the best that we can do for a difficult situation. And so for us, it's really a positive. It's trying to be, you know, trying to keep that positive message. I can tell you it is getting old. I can tell you they are tired of it. I can tell you that, you know, it's the backbiting and the, you know, and the conversation was this morning was, guys, we got this. We know how to do this. I get that it's a little, you know, we're all done and we all want it to go away, but it's not going to. And so all we need to do is pull up our bootstraps, do what we know how to do best, and do it best for the kids. And, you know, and my mantra has been from the very beginning, we're going to be stronger and smarter in the end. And you know what? If a global pandemic ever hits again, we got this. But it's like, we know how to do this. It's just really paying attention and being focused on what our job really is and going out and doing that. But it is, I mean, we got this. We'll be good.
Thank you, Marie. That's amazing. And Gary, I don't want to put you on the spot, but with the 2 minutes left, what say you, sir?
Yeah, I think Mary and Marie both stole my lines for my closing. I think that is what I've been telling my staff and my parents and even my own daughter is that, you know, normal was not working for a lot of people. So we should not be endeavoring to go back to that. Now we have an opportunity to build back better. I think Joe Biden must have heard me say one day and stole it for his campaign, but I think that has to be our goal. As we are away from schools and away from our systems, let's work at making the ones that were not working for us much better. Let's reimagine an educational experience that takes the best practices of distance learning, but also it emphasizes the connectedness of us being together and create a system of education that is excellent for each and every kid. At the end of the day, our goal as educators is to make the dreams and goals and aspirations of our kids that much more attainable and realistic for them so that we are uplifting community, we are building generations of wealth and excellence, but more so that we are respecting and honoring the humanity of each and every one of our kids and that they have access to a better and brighter future, that their horizons are broad and that they dream as big as they can possibly dream because they know because in our programs, in our classrooms, and in our school systems, that they can do it because of us and the support that we provide. So I think right now it's our challenge is the most pressing matter that we don't get complacent in just being able to go back, but when we do go back, that we go back to a better system for our kids, because a better system for our kids means a better, brighter, better future, a brighter future for them as well.
Okay, thank you all so much. Really appreciated all of your insights. I know we've gotten great response from folks listening. ccscenter.org is the website for the center. We'll have this video up. Some of the others we've done. We'll continue to notify folks about future webinars we'll be doing on this. If you have suggestions, please send them to us. But we are trying to get through this all together. I agree with you all that there isn't going back to normal, there's going forward to normal. And so we'll all get there. But we really appreciate all of your time. Bruno, thank you for hosting, and good luck to all as we move forward. Have a great evening.
Thank you.